Hey guys, it's Frederik of the FWX podcast, and I want to talk with you guys about the villains from Avatar The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra. And I'm gonna do that because they're main characters who deserve to have their own video being talked about, and I mainly will talk about those main antagonists. And I will do that in a moment, but first I would like to inform you that you can like this video. You can also subscribe to this channel, which makes this video more available, makes the channel and the podcast more available to people who like content like this, with animation, with fantasy stuff, with more stuff about stories, talk a lot about that, and storytelling and world building as well. I talk a lot about franchises and action movies and a whole ton of that. And so, if you subscribe to the channel, that can happen. Also, you can share this with your friends and your family or your colleagues at your work or also just here online. And you can comment away in the comment section, but please do be polite and friendly when you do that. And lastly, before I begin, I'm not a native English speaker, so if I get something wrong, know that that is purely human and okay. Uh, I might also mispronounce something, or something else might go wrong. But if that happens, well, it is what it is. Let's start talking about the villains from Avatar The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. And for that, I'm going a bit smaller myself for a moment because I want to share some stuff with you. And let's start with villain number one from season one of Avatar The Last Airbender. And it might be a surprise or not a surprise that we should be talking about Zuko, definitely, in this show. And I say that because that is how we first get to know him. He is the banished prince looking for the Avatar so he can have his honor back. Now, I say this because that is how we first meet him. I'll repeat that for a moment so you guys get it. And there is another character that I think about now that kind of serves like a second villain in season two. I'm gonna pull this up for a moment. That is Commander Zhao, the military leader that we see. He's a solid secondary antagonist in season one. By the way, also want to point out here that all of these villains that I've built up for you guys to talk about, some of them have some incredible voice acting. That includes Commander Shao, by the way, who is voiced in this show by Jason Isaacs, who played Lucius Malfoy. Completely checked out for a moment. So yeah, Jason Isaacs was the voice of Commander Zhao. And I have back to him. So what's also interesting is that we see a little bit of a rise when it comes to him. Because at first he has a lower role in the Fire Nation military, but he ends up becoming, oh no, my bad. So at first he's Commander Zhao, and then through some of his actions, he gets to become Admiral. And one of those feats that he manages to do is to have his special task force bowman that we get to see in that episode where both Katara and Sokka are sick and have to suckle on some frogs to get to be healed. And Aang gets captured by Zhao's Bowman task force. I'm forgetting the name and how to pronounce them for a moment. But he sends those bowmen after Aang, hoping to capture him. And that works. It happens. They manage to get him as Aang is getting the resource that they need to heal Sokka and Katara. And I say this in the way because I used to be a gamer myself. And I look at a lot of these things sometimes in a gamer way because I used to be a huge strategy player. And for some things, or on a quest or something, you need a resource to fix something. So that's how I'm thinking about this for a moment. And so Zhao, first the commander in the Fire Nation army, gets to capture the Avatar, but then also lose him to the Blue Spirit. And we get to see who the Blue Spirit is. But first, I want to talk briefly about why exactly. And we get to see in a kind of flashback moment that from Iroh that once upon a time Zuko was way different than he is now. But also, well, there's that famous scene from Iroh where he tells the ship workers, the crew on the ship that Zuko uses to get around the world, how Zuko initially was. But in a brief moment, talking about how he got that scar on his face, which changes their attitude a bit. And that's also recreated in the live action show in one of the better parts, I will say. And that's in fact what this picture is right here. I watched the live action season one. I thought they did a decent job. And I understand that a lot of people say about the live action that it's not the same. Well, yeah, an adaptation needs to stand on its own. This is an adaptation of an animated show. So once again, they did a decent job with that character and really elaborated more. And part of that elaboration was that the crew that Iroh's Iroh's son was with then becomes Zuko's crew, who sailed them around. I'm not sure if sail is the right word, but ships do sail. I'm thinking a bit different about it because there's the steam technology with the motor that uses that. Anyway, so excuse me. Sorry about that, guys. I got a call in the middle of this episode. But anyway, so I'll just finish up with what I was saying about Zhao. Is that he's decent. Deuter antagonist is the term, like a secondary villain. And he ultimately, as we see in the animated show, leads the invasion on the North Pole with his troops. And Yeah, that's about as much as we can say about him, except that later in one of the seasons of The Legend of Korra, we get to see him for a brief moment as they're stuck in the that fog location in the spirit world where he talks to himself, looking all weary and crazy, which is this picture right here, of course. All right, enough about Shao. Let's talk a bit more about Zuko more. So, like I said, we know how Zuko eventually turns out. I would call him a tragic hero, in fact, because of his redemptive arc. But when we see a lot more about him, who he is, through the use of the flashbacks and his alone episodes, Zuko Alone, where we see him show a bit more of his favorable side early on, early esque on. And I was looking for this Blue Spirit, which is actually that's a good question. What would you think the Blue Spirit exactly is? Except the explanation that Iroh gives to the crew of the ship that they're using is that the Avatar gives Zuko hope for a chance to regain his previous life. But what is exactly the point of being a Blue Spirit? And that's an interesting question to ask of you guys. I want to know your opinion. Please let me know in the comments down below what you think of the Blue Spirit. Because it's incredibly interesting how, for someone so supposedly so hot tempered and with tantrums and occasionally being kind of like a brat, someone so very skilled in stealth can be. Huh. Here's an interesting picture, by the way, of him with a blue dragon. This is obviously some kind of fan art or something, showing him with a blue dragon. This is Look at this. This is very cool. Obviously artwork. Still very cool. Maybe it details his two sides. Again, like one of the explanations from Iroh, but then in the back half of the seasons, especially in season 3, that he that Iroh says to Zuko in the prison is that there have always been two halves of you, and it's up to you what you want to do. Okay, I feel like I've talked enough about this. So those are the two main villains from season 1 of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Let's talk about the next two. And I'm gonna go first with this one. Long Thing, the Grand Secretariat of Ba Sing Se. That's what it says right here. And he's also the head of the Daily. And the Daily is basically like a secret police that we get to see once the crew, of Team Avatar is in Ba Sing Se. And he has a lot of power. He's, in fact, as it says right here, the de facto ruler of Ba Sing Se, and is using the king like a puppet. And we get to see, I'm showing you some of the pictures here of the look of the Dai Lian of Long Feng, which makes it really interesting. And specifically, the interesting thing comes actually from the main villain in season 2, and that is actually this one, of course, Azula. It was all about killer perfectionism, an isolated mess of a person with an extremely dark side who is not afraid to cut a bitch, meaning not afraid to do the evil stuff. She temporarily kills Aang, strikes Iroh in the shoulder, I think, during that episode, The Chase, where she and the other two, Mei and Tai Li, are after the group because Appa's shedding so much of his fur. And in the finale of season 2, we come to see that a power play over the Dai Li and over Ba Sing Se and the larger Earth Kingdom. Although some of the other places in the Earth Kingdom are ruled by other people. For instance, Aang's longtime friend Bumi, who has the city of Amashu under his control for some time. And so Long Feng seems to be kind of, well, kind of like his organization, manipulative, secretive. He kept a lot of intelligence and reports for himself that he was using. There's a scene right after he's taken away where Aang and the others get correspondence that he was holding on to, like the fact that there was a guru out there about to help Aang, help him on his path to becoming a fully fledged avatar with the avatar state. We also get a letter for Sokka and Katara about the whereabouts of their father and his ships, his Water Tribe fleet, and then also the letter that Toph got from her mom in wanting to reacquaintance with her, which was really a plot by those that were sent after her to get her. So this guy was obviously a snake to begin with. Taking him away could only be done in a way like he would do. It would take someone cunning and special and snide, which is why at the end of season 2 we get to see that Azula does that. The main difference between them is that he is not of royal or nobility, and also um, it's not completely evident to me if he was an Earthbender or not, because he had so much troops with him all the time that could have very well just handled him and got him away in time. Although he does lashes out after Appa when Appa rescues the group from him at the very end as they're breaking out of Lake Ilaugai, and we get that toss of him done with a fun joke at the end, of course, with the slipper being spit out by Appa. So it took someone as equally cunning as him, snide, and like a serpent, like Azula. And what's obviously very different, well, let's just talk about season 2 Azula. We don't know all that much about her except for what we get told about her. She's Zuko's younger sister. She has insane firebending abilities, has that special blue fire that she can use. This is just one of the examples. Ah, here's a moment. This is an interesting moment, by the way. It's kind of a. This is during their fight, Azula versus Zuko initially, with their grand Agni Kai at the very end in the finale, which we see that Zuko has severely leveled up and is able to handle his own sister, who is really cut loose, is unhinged, who seems to slip at every moment. Because that's what happens with tyrants when they fall. They go unhinged. And I'm totally not referring one particular kind of ruler right now. The orange one. And yeah, but what makes her so crazy is also what makes her so interesting. Her ability with fire, bending, and lightning as well, which is one of those subbending abilities that I've talked about with the heroes too. Some of the villains have them too. And for her, it's lightning. Being snide, cunning, that's personality stuff, of course. But she's an interesting one. Arguably up there with the evilest of them. Okay, let's talk about another interesting character that we don't really get to see a lot of, but I had to have a representative from the spirit world in this list, and that is this guy, Koh the Face Stealer. And that name alone gives you shivers. And it's a bit more elaborated on in the live action series about what Koh does, including taking away a previous avatar's significant other and literally stealing the face of that person. And Aang meets this character in the spirit world having to look after the two spirits that have forgone their spiritual side and are now characters living in the real world. The original waterbenders, the two fish, the yin and yang symbol in the pond. And so we and Aang stumble upon Koh the Face Stealer, who gives that hint. And part of the interesting thing about Koh is that if you show emotion, your face is gonzo. And so, for someone so emotionally torn as Aang, as we can see in pictures right here, this is kind of dark. But that is the whole point, of course. Oh, God. This is kind of like fan art, but it's Not bad. Yeah, so actually, now that I think about it, Koh kind of reminds me of a villain from Lord of the Rings, who we also don't really know a lot about when we come to her. And then is Shelob, the spider, very large, big spider, and we don't really know a lot about that character either, because they're so mysterious and dark, makes them very similar to each other. Yeah, I wanted to have a spiritual representative for the villains in this. I hope they elaborate on this character because it's mysterious and dark, and this will kind of shock you, but one of my favorite lines in movies ever is from the seventh Fast and the Furious movie, where Mr. Nobody says, "You know how you kill a shadow? You just shine a little light on it." And that's the whole point here, too. If we know more about Ko, it doesn't even have to be like a tragedy or something. We can we can be less afraid of him or her. It's a creature, so it could be either or something else as well. Okay, let's talk about kind of the overbearing antagonist, the main villain of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and that's of course Firelord Ozai, voiced by arguably the biggest voice actor. Well, and it's kind of an adjacent work for him of our age, Mark Hamill, who did the Joker in the series, in the animated series from Batman, and then in different work as well, the Arkham video game series, and then a couple of other. You might also know him from a little role called Luke Skywalker, but he plays the villain in this series. Firelord Ozai, Azula, and Zuko's father, who is an overbearing, power hungry villain, wants to rule the world. I'm reminded of that song by Fear for Fear. Everybody wants to rule the world. And he seems a bit stereotypical for a villain. But what I do like, and this is a rule that I have come across, it's something that's very interesting. Uh, I talked in a previous video about show don't tell, which you can find by clicking the card. And there's another rule that I like to throw in there, which is there's a way to build up a cool character or a really interesting villain is by mentioning them a lot, is building them up to be as powerful as they might be. I think the kid's done well with Ozai. Uh, if you think otherwise, you can give me some feedback in the comments but down below. But I think this is done well with Firelord Ozai, is that there's such a hype up building up towards the final confrontation between Aang and the Firelord that the question really becomes then, did it live up? But I think it did live up to that moment because there's 4 episodes at the very end that serve as a finale for Avatar: The Last Airbender, where we have different fights happening at the same time. You have Aang versus Ozai, evil versus good, light versus dark, freedom versus control, and you also have at that same time the battle between Azula and Zuko, while Katara is close by watching it all happen. And then, of course, there's a third battle, I will say, not just a fight, where Sokka, Suki, and Toph take on the troops with the air balloon fleet. And there's not really a main villain for that part, but you had to have someone take on the supposed army. And all of this is also amplified or accelerated by the fact that there's currently a comet going over the world, giving the firebenders some extra juice, a lot more power than intended. And actually, I'm thinking of even a fourth battle at the same time because you have the members of the White Lotus, which is Iroh's older man group of talented villains. I'm gonna say that differently for a moment. There's a fourth battle happening at the same time where our good friend Iroh is taking back Passing Say in an act of goodness for what he has done to it before, having broken it so many years ago, where he unfortunately lost his son, but now is reclaiming it for peace and prosperity and the goodwill for the world. Actually, I'm intrigued by this picture. Like, what would have been a battle between these two like? And that's also something that Iroh addresses in the lead up to those battles is that a brother fighting a brother would not be seen right to the history of the world, which is an ardent perspective of this, because it would just be about control and power, and that's not really what the world needs right now. It needs change, generational change. And I can't believe it, but that is such a good point. Also, especially in our real world, is that needs to go better. And I do believe, to get a little into politics for a moment, real life politics for a moment, that is happening. The question is, do we do it violently or not? And that's up to the people, especially the younger generation, which I will get back into the fiction here, is all what Iroh is about. We need generational change, and it needs to be someone who has come around on things, has looked inside themselves and become a better person. Someone whose past was troubled and full of tragedy, but then turn it around like Zuko. So, and that marks a good bookend for that last season of Avatar, The Last Airbender. Now, I'm gonna continue with the villains from Legend of Korra, but I want to make this for a moment a little closure, because then because then you can make the contrast between villains from these seasons of the first show and now the villains of the second show. And excuse me. And so we go to Legend of Korra, and the very first villain that we meet, the overbearing villain that we meet, is Amon of the Equalists, a supposed group of non-benders who want equality for everyone, but especially themselves. And what makes Amon so frightening so scary is that he uses the truth. He bends the truth for his power. He twists it so that it works for him, for his benefit, and for his followers. And they are learned into the styles of, to working against benders. He's got these folks on the background here who use, I don't know the literal name of what they use, but I'll just say lightning sticks, which shock people, and then the kind of fighting style to block your chi that we see from Tylee in the original series. But then eventually we meet more. We we meet more. I meant we learn more about Amon, how he was the son of the most cruel and snide villain in Republic City many, many years ago. Guy called, I'm losing his damn name. I'm gonna look it up for a moment. Yakone, the former crime boss and bloodbender, as we get to see in those episodes back in the past. And we learn of the story, how he had his face changed after he assaulted the entire courtroom full of people on the day of his sentencing. And he moved to, I'm gonna look this up for a moment. One of the two poles. And so he trained his two sons that he had with a woman. One was Tarlok, the other was Noatak, which is the real name of Amon. And he trained his sons into becoming bloodbenders after his powers were taken away by Avatar Aang at that time. And they became even more proficient with it than he was, not having to use a full moon for it. And they had a fallout. Noatak ran away, and then he formed probably his movement of Equalists. And he got that terrifying visage. And then it's a false identity, exactly. He made up a story that he was assaulted by a firebender, and then he got attacked and he had a vicious scar in his face, this one right here. And he became the leader of the Equalists and tried to equalize everyone into making Republic City a more fairer and equalized society, where the roles would be reversed, where the Equalists would rule and the Benders be submissive to them. And but that all came to an end. Of course, he did have one hell of a massive feat on him. and that has taken away the bending of the avatar. Which, uh, you know what? I want to show you guys when it happens.
Thank you all for joining me on this historic occasion. Let her go!
No!
Korra! I told you I would destroy you. Finally.
Okay, that's about it that I wanted to show you guys because he is freaking scary as hell. You know, in many ways, I think actually he's more scarier than somebody else I'm gonna talk about in a moment because of what he can do. He can take away your bending, he can take away your freedom as a bender to do your damnedest at the special ability that you had when you were born. No matter what bending style you had, apparently, whether it was fire, water, earth, or air, or all four, as we just saw, as I just let you watch. Terribly cunning, and crazy, and scary. But then finally exposed as I didn't get to that point, but maybe we'll just I'll let you watch that for a moment.
You are powerless.
Amon! Everything the Avatar said is true, isn't it? I just saw you bloodbender. You traitor! I dedicated my life to you!
You served me well, Lieutenant.
By the way, another crazy thing I'm about to show you here. Hot damn. I know Maka gets a lot of flack for all the things he does, but one thing can be said. He's one talented firebender.
My bending.
Everything will be all right. We just need to get out of here.
I'm impressed. No one has ever gotten the better of me like that. It is almost a shame to take the bending of someone so talented. Almost.
I can airbend?
Let's stop it at that, because that's what I wanted to show you guys, is that, and I know this is not really a villain thing to talk about, but an Avatar thing. I might do an episode about that as well. But I also wanted to briefly tell you that she can do this, and there's a theory about this, is that blocking the chi of someone, whether it's in the martial arts way that Ty Lee does from the original series, and the Amon's henchman in the second series, that blocks your chi through hitting the pressure points on your body. The blunt bending technique that Amon uses is something quite similar, where it doesn't just really take away your bending for completely, but just really very hardly presses against it and blocks you completely from you reusing your bending. And it's a theory. I don't know if it's actually real. I want to shout out to Tim Hickson from Hello Future Me for this theory. And, well, maybe we can get him to talk about this here on the channel, actually. That'd be cool. And you know what? Sound off in the comments about that. In the comments about that. Maybe I should have Tim over for an interview about this. And any other interesting features about Avatar, Last Airbender, and Legend of Korra to talk about. Okay, let's continue talking about some more villains from this show. So, we talked ad nauseum now about Amon. He's the main villain of season 1, of course, until he comes completely undone near the ending. I'm not going to show you that part because I don't want to completely spoil it for anyone that wants to fully watch this show who hasn't seen it yet. I highly recommend it. It's about as good as the original series as well. Okay, let's talk about the next villain of season 2. So let's talk about Unulaq. Unulaq is actually family of Korra. In fact, he is her uncle, and he's also the chieftain of the northern water tribe. And for this, I'm gonna have to share you some world building with you guys. So I took that large about the world building, and the storytelling in the first video about the original series and the heroes. That there was a huge change in the evolution of technology and the socio-economical stuff and the politics and all of that. And so that came to the point where both the water tribes began to flourish again, especially the southern water tribe began to flourish again under the tutelage of that. I'm forgetting his name, but the former headmaster waterbender in the North Pole, who also happened to be Katara and Sokka's grandfather. And I want to say also that there's a comic out there about Sokka and Katara returning there, and it's now back to more what we've seen as this series. It's back to high society, lots more people in there doing their things, and so many years down the line, about 75 years later, we get to meet up back in this community, and we also get to meet Korra's family as well, which includes Unulaq, her uncle, the brother of her father. And Unulaq is an interesting case because he belongs to an organization. He used to belong to an organization where I'm going to be talking about a lot more up next. And initially, he wants to be Korra's spiritual advisor because she's supposedly been neglecting everything that's been happening with the spirits, and she has always struggled with that spiritual side of herself. But now there's also been sightings of negative and malicious spirits, especially in the water tribe regions and in the waters as well. And that has led to her uncle Unulaq, her father's brother, to consult her on these things. And he is, I think of him actually like I did with Long Feng from the Dai Li. Snide, cunning. But Unulaq has a little bit more life and temperament in him. He's got stuff that he plans, and he has a much larger plot in thought to do, and that leads him to releasing the original god. Let's call it a god for a moment, but it's really a spirit. And I'm gonna have to talk about the lore for a moment again. So I talked about the flashback episodes where we get to meet Avatar 1, who was the very first Avatar, and his journey. And that is tied into this story as well. Because after a lot of family drama and friendship drama and romantic drama in Republic City, Korra tries to return back, tries and goes help, tries to get help from the Fire Nation, but on the way she's attacked by one of those malicious spirits I just talked about. That leads her to a coast somewhere in the Fire Nation, and she has to go through a process where she needs to re-identify herself as the person she is and as the Avatar. And that includes going through those flashbacks and having to see the story of Avatar 1, the very first Avatar. And we get to learn a lot more about the spirits and how the spirit realm and the real world used to be one big place, but it drove apart because us people became so diverse and different and a lot more, which separated the two worlds. And the spirit world is a invisible world from human beings in this particular world, in this particular universe, or world really. I'll just say world because there's no other planes of existence as far as we know, except for the spirit realm. And so we get to learn a lot about all that lore, which includes the spirit of light, Rava, and her opposite, Vatu. And Vatu, as you can clearly see from these pictures, is very evil coded in his design. Lots of red, lots of dark colors, in clear contrast to Rava, who is a lighter spirit. There's a lot. There's a lot of great art about them, and there's a gif of Vatu using his power as well, in a way that he likes to, and try to obliterate people with like lots of beams, which is probably one of the criticism stuff from season 2, I think, from Legend of Korra, is that it turns into a lot of beams and lasers and stuff like that. So initially there was a fight between Vaatu and Rava, which was meant to last for forever, but then that was broken up by Avatar 1, who at first was just one, but then he went around, had his own trials and tribulations journey, his hero's journey, and that led to him finally meeting Rava and Vaatu, and he split them up. Maybe there's a picture of that here. Nah, doesn't matter. There was, you seen that GIF that at that point when they meet up again after splitting up, one has gone through his trials and tribulations, has become an experienced bender of all four bending styles: water, air, fire, and water. I think I just said it different: earth, water, fire. Anyway, you know the ones I'm talking about. And so, like I said, they meet up again. They have a huge fight, and finally, through the fusing of One and Rava, he becomes the very first avatar, which allows One to cage Vaatu in the Tree of Life that we see in. Here's another picture. Yeah, so they got to this plane in this picture. In the middle is the Tree of Life, which One used to cage Vaatu. And that started the age of the Avatar for thousands of years. And then I'm gonna head back to that thing that I've talked about earlier. And I'm talking about harmonic convergence. So the age of the Avatar lasted for about 10,000 years. Then it was opened up back into the time that we find it, as it is highlighted right here. And the other villain I was just talking about, Unulaq, knew this. He studied all of that. He had a way of repelling the spirits through water bending, which is yet another sub-bending style to get rid of malicious spirits. But he had larger ideas of doing or using this. And he ended up using his niece, Korra, the Avatar, to get his hands on Vaatu, the spirit of darkness. In a big picture. Well, at this point, I've said it enough, I think. And so that after a lot of family drama, romantic drama, and friendship drama, we finally get the finale in season 2 where Unulaq is completing his plan by fusing with Vaatu and becoming for the very first time a dark avatar. Like in this picture. Maybe there's a better one. Yeah, this is a good big one. So this is the fusing of Unulaq and Vaatu. And one part actually choosing to keep out for a moment is that Unulaq used to be a member of a group. And he initially caused that group to be locked up for a long, long time. And so he used his career to get this point to become a dark avatar. And I'm guessing kind of like Ozai wanting to rule over the world. This is a pretty dope moment. And then we get into the lightning beam fest again, of course, which is the finale of season 2. And for many people, I've heard and kind of seen it everywhere else, especially in this picture right here. He's kind of not liked as a villain because he has such grand plans and becoming a dark avatar. And yeah, that's about as much as I want to say about that. So I did mention that he used to be part of a group. That group was the Red Lotus. And the Red Lotus initially wants to rid the world of its control, and they had a leader named Zahir, who initially is just an anarchist believing in the foundation of a new world without the order of the White Lotus. This is from the Avatar Wikipedia fandom. Just head back to the pictures. Easier. So he had a lot of ideals and principles and stuff that he wanted to do. I'm gonna get into something else for in a moment too. And so basically, they were a terrorist organization that wanted to lay waste to the institutions of old and install kind of the idea of when things burn and you allow them to settle, then things will grow anew. That's their whole philosophy. Tear down the old in favor of the new. And their ideas were extremist and crazy, and for those reasons they are extremists. And so Zahir is the initial leader of this group. I'm gonna look up those other names for a moment. But Zahir is only the leader, and there are a few other characters that are interesting in this group. So here's a picture ranking the most powerful Red Lotus members. And what initially happens with Zahir, we don't really know, except that he and his compatriots, these other three, are put away in some extreme prisons made for them to not be able to bend, which was initially for him no trouble, as for Zahir, because he had no bending initially. But this happens after harmonic convergence. And then we learn that Zahir also got airbending abilities. And because of his philosophy and his martial arts style, he uses airbending in an offensive way, which makes him such an interesting villain. Is that he's very much a philosopher and a doer, and is not afraid to do extreme things. And that is the same for his compatriots. And so he has three of those. That includes Plea, the lady here right next to him, who also used to be his lover. And I say used to be because some shit happens to her. And we kind of get it uh, in the dialogue between them as they talk, is that she used to be belong to someone and he saved her from that person. And she is like combustion man, able to shoot stuff with a third eye that she has. Then we know very little about Gazan except that he is able to do lava bending, as we can see in his battles. And finally, Plea, who is an armless waterbender who uses water as an extension of herself. And she very much represents like that figure I talked about earlier, like Koh. She is terrifying to say the least in battle. But when you can hold off against her, she can actually be done for, which is also what happens. And so, individually, Zahir is a force on his own, but with his three compatriots, they are destructive to the world, to say the least. And when they work together, they're formidable. And then it's also interesting when we see in the last season Zahir kind of coming around and having to help Korra with some of her key stuff. And so these were also initially friends for life. Here's a picture from when they're younger, and then stuff happens. And initially, they tried to do their operation when Korra was younger, trying to steal Korra from her family and the White Lotus for their ideals because they don't believe in old institutions and leaders like any kings and queens or presidents and stuff like that, or even the Avatar. And that leads us in the very end of the finale of season 3 to a mega battle between now the grown-up group and uh, and Korra and her group as they fend off against each other. Also crazy because Korra at this point has been poisoned by the group with something. I'm forgetting the name. But this poison uh, channels the Avatar state through her, which results in that crazy fight that Korra has with Zahir, while the other three are trying to fend off against uh, Team Avatar, the Beifong family, and the upcoming airbending people, plus the Ten, plus Tenzin's family. Yes, which is a great finale at the very end of season 3, which you should really see. This is actually an amazing fight. Battles, fights, and battles throughout this series. Plus, some stuff that I can't believe Nickelodeon get away with. Okay, let's talk about the final villain of this series, Kavira. So Kavira, in many ways, is the kind of villain that we see a lot, resembling both Ozai and Unulaq a lot, in wanting initially to do good things, but then really leaning into really bad things. And so Kavira initially was a earthbender, metalbender from the Metal Clan, and under the tutelage of Su Yin, Top's daughter, and she had ambition, and initially wanted to do good things, but then they gradually grew into owning the Earth Empire after restoring it and wanting to use it as her own vast empire to rule. And she very much resembles what we in our today etymology, that's the wrong word, what we call fascists. What we call fascists and dictators, basically. And also, important thing here, there's a serious time change into season 4. This is a couple of years later when things have grown beyond proportions, and the Earth Empire has grown beyond proportions as Kuvira has restored it with the help of the some members of the Bayfam family, specifically Batar Jr., who I've talked about, and then another character I didn't really talk about, Varric, who we meet in the very first season of Legend of Korra, who kind of resembles a villain, but not. He's not insidious or malicious enough to really be called a villain. Just someone with transactional means, really. Kind of reminds me of someone. The orange one. And his compatriots. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, but back to the fiction part. So she pretty much resembles like a military dictator. Initially, with the right idea of making the world a better place with those that are of lesser means and resources. But then something changes, and finally she comes after everybody else, which leads into a huge, not just a fight, but a battle. Or actually, a battle that leads into a fight. Because there's this, at the very end of the show, in the finale, there's a huge battle between her and Korra in a giant mech. Just to tease you guys a little, because I want people to go and watch this if you haven't already. And yeah, it's an ending of epic proportions and absolutely worth watching. And all of this has me excited for what's coming next for Avatar in World. And I know they're working on a new thing. Actually, while I'm talking about this, I'm going to go back to me. So I'm hoping that we'll get to see some interesting stuff with this new uh, story that they're making with the Seven Havens storyline. And I hope that happens. So, guys, that's a lot from me. Before I go at the end of this episode, I want to thank you for being here, for listening and watching to this episode of the FWX podcast. Before I go, you can still like this video. I would love for you to do that. You can also subscribe to the channel, and both those things will help this video and the channel and the podcast to become more available to people who like to watch this kind of thing about the world of Avatar specifically, but then the stuff we talk about on the channel and the podcast as well when it comes to franchises, action movies, storytelling, mechanics, world building as well. Talk a lot about characters, talked about in world stuff, talk about magic, and I hope that you do that. And then you can also still share this with those that you know and love and care for, like friends and family, but also people at your work or maybe just here online. And you can comment in the comment section if you want, but do keep it polite and friendly. Finally, I've been Frederik for the FWX podcast, and I hope to see you guys in the next episode. See ya.